Hello and welcome to another live stream. Today we're going to be talking about public domain content and how AI is going to make it like absolutely amazing. I think this is an incredible opportunity for a lot of different authors out there. One that I'm already starting to see develop for myself. I recently did a video all about public domain content and how I was using AI to enhance my public domain content. And that video actually did really well. And so I decided to just do like a full deep dive masterclass kind of thing here and do it live so that you can ask me questions and things like that as we go along. So we're going to do that today. Now, as a little bit of a side note, I know some of you, well, I'll get to that in a little bit. But public domain content. So I've made upwards of almost $9,000 right now with public domain content. Now, it's certainly not anything that you can like retire on, right? But most of the work that I did for that public domain content, I did like 3 years ago. Then I stopped because I had other things that I was working on, other projects. That was just sort of something I dabbled in for a while. And without any effort from me, other than the initial publishing of the public domain content, that has continued to make me between $150 and $200 every single month. Completely passively, like 100% passively. I've done no marketing. I've done absolutely nothing, and it continues to make me money online. I don't know why we're on my Facebook page here. We're going to be pulling up a couple of different things. Okay. First of all, we are talking about publishing these books on Amazon. I actually got a few comments in the last video saying like, how are you actually making money with this? Like, this sounds cool, but like, where do you sell it? And the answer is Amazon. I've tried selling it on other places. I've tried connecting my public domain books through Drafted Digital, which, if you don't know, Drafted Digital is an aggregator that will take your book and distribute it on all the platforms that you ask for. And from there, you can take those take the books and it'll just distribute it everywhere. And I've done that, and I end up running into a lot of roadblocks. Most of the different platforms have their own standards on public domain, and a lot of them will stop you in your tracks, and you have to like prove it's public domain. Amazon does this, but you know, it's Amazon. And I've often found that it's harder to publish public domain content on other platforms unless you really have something that you think is worth the effort. So personally, I find that trying to publish it on other platforms is not really worth the effort for the monetary gain that I get. But I do publish this on Amazon. This is my KDP account right here. In fact, you can see some public domain books that I've written right here. Not written, but assembled, curated. Here's another one, Fairy Queen Book 1. And along with a couple of my own books in here. And there's a number of steps that go into this process. And last time in my last video, I just talked about using AI and what that involves. This time I'm going to take you through the entire process. And then we're going to actually see like how the sausage gets made and all the different steps. And hopefully we'll have enough time to do so here in the next hour or so. So if you have questions about this or anything as I go along, feel free to put them in the chat. The reason I'm doing this live is so that you can ask me questions in case I miss something, or in case there's a you know, something that I may take for granted that other people might not be so clear on. So feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat so that we can talk about them. I see there's a couple of you already tuning in. That's really awesome. Now, some of you may be wondering, Jason, it's been a little while since we've seen you. And there's a reason for that. Firstly, I went on vacation for 2-3 weeks, and that wasn't really an issue because I had built up a backlog of videos to run while I was on vacation, and even like a week or two after my vacation. So I was prepared for that, but turns out as I got back from my vacation, I started to have a slight medical issue, namely a large abscess. So, you know, an abscess is just like a pocket of pus. And this was in a particularly bad location. And then it got majorly infected and ended up, first of all, I dragged my heels as long as I could. My doctor gave me an antibiotic, and I was hoping that would just be enough. And I just laid in bed for like a week, but finally it turned out like, nah, can't drag my heels anymore. And I went to the emergency room, and they ended up hospitalizing me for 4 days, and then there's like another week of recovery after that before I was ready to start going back to work. I started going back to work a week ago. And so the production process on my videos has resumed, but you haven't seen any of them yet because, they have to be edited and all of that stuff. So you'll see some new videos soon. But I thank you for your patience while there have been no videos coming out because I was going through some stuff, and thankfully things are getting better and resuming, and so we'll keep going from there. All right, so let's dig deep into this whole process. I'm gonna pull up my notes here. All right, first let's start with Amazon's guidelines on public domain content. Let me just pull up these Amazon guidelines, public domain, publishing public domain content. Here we go. All right. So if you want to publish public domain content to Amazon, there are some stipulations that you have to keep in mind. You can't just go copy and paste your copy of Pride and Prejudice or Treasure Island or whatever it is onto a book and then just publish it and hope that it'll start making sales. Amazon requires you to do something with it to make it unique and potentially valuable to a customer. And there are 3 different ways you can do that. And they're right here. The first is an original translation. So if the public domain content that you're working with is written in a different language, say different from English, and then you translate that content into English, or from English into another language for that matter, that translation can be posted on Amazon as an original translation. Now, in the past, this has been very difficult because you have to be fluent in the language, you have to be a translator, you have to do all these things. And so usually most of the translations were coming out from like academic institutions and scholars and things like that. With AI, this is now an easier thing to do. So if you want to do like a separate translation with AI, bearing in mind that the AI translations are not perfect, so keep that in mind, you can do that. And that's one easy way to do that. So for instance, I've actually done this. I have a book that I put together. You can actually see it. It's this one right here, The History of the Holy Grail. This was originally written in Old French. And the only English version of this and the other volumes of this book were written recently, relatively, like within the last couple of decades, and published by like some obscure academic press. And because of that, it's really difficult to get your hands on that English copy of the thing, and there's no Kindle version, and so you have to get print copies. I have mine right here that I spent like $400 on because it's really difficult to get your hands on the whole set. But the original Old French version is in the public domain. The updated English version is not because it was published recently. And so I took the Old French version and I translated it into English with AI. It's not going to be as good as the academic English translation, but at least I'm able to make it more accessible to the world. I've already made a couple of sales on these since I published them not too long ago. So about 2 months ago, I published this. It's made a couple of sales, again, completely passively. And from what I've experienced with these books in the past is that the number of sales tends to slightly increase for a couple of months as Amazon figures out who is buying this book. And then it sort of flatlines at a certain point. So I have every reason to expect that the sales of this book will continue to grow. Okay, so that's translations. The second option is your annotations. And I feel like this is what a lot of people do. when they are publishing public domain is they'll create annotations. So this can be additional content like study guides, literary critiques, detailed biographies, or historical context. So if you have the ability to add, like, say, footnotes to your book, and you want to be somewhat thorough, like, don't just throw in 3 footnotes into your book and call that new annotation. I don't think Amazon would go for that. It needs to be pretty thorough. AI makes it very easy to make things like study guides, or literary critiques, commentary, detailed biographies, things like that. All of that extra additional information can be thrown in. And that's one of the things that AI can easily help you with. Although I strongly recommend you thoroughly review it to make sure it reads well, that you're creating something that somebody would actually gain value out of. The third and final way to do this is with illustrations. This is another way that AI can help you easily, because it's easy to make artwork with AI. And again, of course, make sure it's good artwork, make sure it's relevant, make sure people might actually enjoy looking at it. When it comes to creating print books, I recommend creating some kind of illustration that is black and white, or that can work in black and white, because it's going to be printed in black and white. But before AI, you would have to hire somebody to create 10 or more original illustrations. I actually did that for a couple of books, and it worked out, but it's much easier to do now. Now, you may be wondering, does Amazon care if you're using AI to do all of these things? And the answer is no. They're just trying to make sure things are differentiated enough so that they won't get into any like legal squabbles between people contending that they stole their version of the public domain thing or whatever. So they just want to make sure it's differentiated. They don't care how you differentiate it or what tools you used to get it there. Okay. Alrighty. So let's continue on here. So these are the public domain content guidelines. And you just need to make sure you're adhering to that. All right, let me pull up my Atticus account here. And the other thing that we want to do is, well, let's discuss niching down. So the first thing, there's literally millions of books out there that are in the public domain. And you may be wondering, how do I know if it's in the public domain or not? Let me find one of my public domain books here. While we're here. Actually, I might not have created one yet for this. So this is one that I created a little while ago. And the way it works is, this is an epic poem. I have commentary here. So this is like a summary of the canto, which is like the chapter. And I put the original. This is the original epic poem. And then I created a modern translation here. So it's kind of like, it's like both translation and annotated. I didn't put any original illustrations here, or I could have done all 3. But I did both of those. So the other thing we're going to pull up is Novel Crafter. And I think this is the one we want. And okay, I was clearly using this for demonstration purposes on some completely unrelated tasks. So we may need to create an entirely new project here. We're going to call this The Fairy Queen Book 2. Edmund Spencer's the original. And I'll just ignore the series for now. All right. Initial scene, chapter 1. And I think I have, in Atticus, I have Fairy Queen. Well, that might not have been. I could have sworn I had the entire text of the Fairy Queen here somewhere. It's just my notes. To summary. Okay, well, we're gonna have to create one from scratch here. What we can do is we're gonna duplicate this first one. So if you're unfamiliar, The Fairy Queen is an epic poem by Edmund Spenser, who lived back in Shakespeare's day. Okay, I accidentally did too many copies. So let's go to edit book details, book 2. We'll get rid of the image here because we'll need a different one. And keep all of that the same. And then this should be divided into different. Okay, so we want the Fairy Queen full text. All right, so I'm getting ahead of myself here. So first, let's talk about finding a niche. So there, as I mentioned, there are millions of books out there that are all considered public domain. And you can do any of them that you want. But first of all, you need to make sure that it is in the public domain. And whether it is or not, it's going to depend a little bit on the rules of your country. The two that you're going to be running into most of the time are, first of all, the rules in the US and the rules in the UK. Though the rules in the UK are used in a lot of different countries as well. So these are the two rules for public domain content that you're going to run into the most. The way it works in the US is it's anything that's older than like 96 years or something like that. So almost 100 years ago. If it's older than that, it's public domain. Let me just confirm what that is. So what year is the public domain cutoff? I don't trust the AI version here, ironically. Okay. So according to Wikipedia, all works published or released in the United States before January 1, 1929, so basically everything from 1928 and older, have lost the copyright protection 95 years later. So yeah, it is 95 years, which means that every year on January 1st, there is a new year of public domain content that enters the public domain. So that's a really good opportunity right there. If you're looking for public domain stuff to do, look at what just entered the public domain that year and work at publishing that. So some things that recently entered the public domain, for instance, are I think some of the Winnie the Pooh books, for instance, and some of the Tarzan books and a few others. In fact, we can look this up. What books entered the public domain in 2024? Since that's the year we're in, and we can get a list here. Here's a bunch of books. So we have Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, Coming of Age in Samoa, The Missing Chumps. Okay, so a bunch of Hardy Boy books are entering the public domain. That's cool. I used to read those as a kid. The Trumpeter of Cacao, and then a bunch of films. We're not worried about films right now. But you may have seen the news that Steamboat Willie, the first Mickey Mouse cartoon, did enter the public domain this year, as well as some other things that Walt Disney made at that time. There's musical composition, sound, international works. The House of Pooh Corner went into the public domain. Passion of Joan of Arc. So there's a bunch of stuff, and you can research that every year. See, ooh, that would probably make a good thing to publish right there. Let's see if there's any. Anyway, so those are the rules in the United States. Anything older than 95 years enters the public domain, which means we get new stuff every year. In the UK and a lot of other countries, now I'm not a legal expert here, so please do not make assumptions. Make sure to do your own research. But as I understand it, in many other countries, there's not a specific cutoff date. It is 70 years after the death of the author. So there are going to be situations where something is public domain in the UK and not in the US. One of these situations is actually H.P. Lovecraft. So many of you have heard of H.P. Lovecraft. He died at a relatively young age. And so because of that, his work entered the public domain, 70 years later, which was like the end of, I mean, it wouldn't have been that long ago. I forget exactly when he died. But not all of his work is more than 95 years old. So there are some of his work, like the Call of Cthulhu, which is one of his most famous works, that I don't think, unless it's been a few years, I don't think it's in the public domain in the US yet. But it is public domain everywhere else, because the author died, and then we've waited 75 years. Now everything from H.P. Lovecraft is public domain in those other countries, but only some of his work is public domain in the US because it's only some of his work was written 95 years or more ago. So that's just something to keep in mind. So make sure that you are publishing it. Usually I just go for the US as the main standard. There are also situations where books published after 1928 are in the public domain because their copyright was never renewed. The problem is it's very difficult to figure out documentation of whether that happened or not. So there are some, for instance, there's a lot of pulp fiction out there that was never renewed just because people didn't get around for it. But usually the pulp fiction that was written by more famous authors, like, say, Isaac Asimov or Edgar Rice Burroughs or some of those, they did take the time to renew their copyright, so it's still copyrighted. But you will find some that is not copyrighted because it was never renewed. So that makes it difficult. And just to keep things clean, I just stick with the stuff that is clearly in the public domain. So anything beyond or anything before 1929 is fair game in my book. Very rarely, in fact, if it's older than 1929, chances are it will be in the public domain everywhere you go. And so that's usually just what I use, but you do need to make sure you do your research. The other thing to keep in mind, sorry, I've got a lot of tangents here, but the other thing to keep in mind is if you're looking at translations, there may be a public domain work that it's public domain in its original language that it was written in, but there may be English translations of that work that were not done until after 1929. And so because of that, the English translation might not be in the public domain, whereas the original language version is in the public domain. So you can still use the original language. You can use AI to translate it into English. You just can't use the English version of that book if it was published after 1929 and still has the copyright in force. Okay, hope that makes sense. I'm not seeing a lot of chatter in the chat, so if you do have questions, be sure to let me know. Hopefully I will, hopefully everything's working with the comments there, with the chat. But yeah, let me know in the chat right now, if it's working and you're able to access it. Because I haven't seen anybody respond yet. Just help me know if this is all making sense, right? All right. So now that we've covered everything, what is public domain? What is considered public domain? The next thing is to figure out what kind of things do you want to talk about. And my top recommendation for this, there's two approaches that you can go for. The first is, it works. It's not what I do. And that is to actually seek out books that are potentially in high demand, but are not being serviced on Amazon. So books that people do want to look at and read. Okay, so the chat's working. Good. Thank you. Um, so you can do a lot of research on books, and and figure out which books are like oversaturated on Amazon and which ones are not. And what you're going to do is you're going to find a spectrum. If you want to go out and publish Pride and Prejudice, there is not a very good chance that you're going to get much visibility, because everyone and their grandmother has published their own version of Pride and Prejudice online. You could maybe do a complete works of Jane Austen, but that one is also pretty saturated. And you're unlikely to find a whole lot of headway with that approach. By contrast, there's going to be a lot of public domain work out there that is the exact opposite, where maybe it's never been published on Amazon because it's so obscure. And those books tend to not sell very well either, because they are so obscure. You could have like a treatise on like some scientific something or other by an old 18th century scientist that you've never heard of before, writing about some obscure topic. That content is out there. You can find it. It's just so obscure and so uninteresting that nobody's really interested in reading it for the most part. At least not in buying a version of it from Amazon. They can go online and read it where all of us can. So that's the way it works. In the middle somewhere, between the oversaturated books like your Prides and Prejudices and your Iliad and Odyssey and Sherlock Holmes and all of that stuff's going to be overly saturated, because we all know those things, and there's tons of versions of the books out there. Between the ones that are really, really obscure that nobody's going to pick it up, somewhere in the middle there is a sweet spot of books that people are interested in. Particularly, you'll find like niches of people, little groups and stuff like that, that are completionists in their little area. And they're looking for versions of books that are important to them. But because they're not Sherlock Holmes or Pride and Prejudice, there are fewer versions of the books available to them. And some of the versions of those books that you'll find on Amazon don't look great. Okay, I'll give you an example. And this is one that I know from myself. There is a book called Godothin. Or Godothin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right at all. But no, this is actually new. I haven't seen this one before. This looks like a very professional, well-published, probably traditionally published version of the book. Yeah, this is good. And it's got a high rating and stuff, and it's got an audiobook. So this is new. But when I got started in I guess it's not that new, 2021. I might have published mine before this. But this is probably the only really professional version that I see published on this particular document. This is an Arthurian, it's an old English Welsh tale. And it's like an epic battle kind of thing. And it has the novelty of being the first document to mention King Arthur. And because I write Arthurian fiction, I knew of this book, and I was just like, and I went online and I looked, and I was like, all that I saw were books like this. You see this one, like this chain, like what the heck does this chain mean? It has nothing to do with the thing. This one was a little bit better. You have this picture of a guy on horseback in a battle, but clearly this is a very like shoddy cover and not really great. The Godothin poems, none of this looks great. Okay. So I created my version, and this is my version. It's number 2 here, and it's just a paperback. I didn't actually create an ebook version for reasons I'll get into in a second. I'm planning on redoing this and creating an ebook version. And so this version looks a lot more professional, at least to my eyes. It looks better, right? Like let's pull this up. Cover's a little bit more professional. This part here in the middle is a stock, not a stock image, but an image from the actual original text. Makes it look kind of cool. It looks semi-professional. It looks good. You can tell from 18 ratings that it's been purchased. And this is one of my most successful public domain books, because all I did is I took it and I formatted it and I made it look nice. And it was in that niche where like not a whole lot of people knew about it, but there was a group of people that were looking for it. And those people were underserved because all of the other versions that you saw on Amazon didn't look great, right? There were no really professional done books. Now, M. Prado says, is it legal to take public domain versions and change parts of it? Yes. If it is in the public domain, you can do whatever the heck you want with it. And I really mean that seriously. Like anything you want to do with it, you know, as long as it's like, you know, legal. You're not going to be like hurting people or something. You're like, I don't know. Within reason. Okay, we'll just say it that way. Anything you want to do within reason. You want to change parts of it. So you want to write your own version of the story with your own characters and change anything you want about it. If you want to remove whole parts and like just focus in on one, like abridge it somehow, the possibilities are endless. You can do anything you want with a public domain book. There is absolutely no legal restrictions around it. As long as it is in the public domain. That's the only thing you have to make sure, because the rules about what is and isn't public domain varies depending on what country you are. I've already gone over this, but in the US, it's anything older than 95 years. So that's 1929, or anything older than 1929 as of today is in the public domain. Once January 1st rolls around of 2025, then it'll be anything older than 1930 will be in the public domain. So we get new stuff every year in the public domain. So anyway, that's just reiterating that. And Countryside Limbo says, well, I missed the start. So how do we search for public domain books? I'll get into that in a second. Right now, I'm just going over niches. And I think I've kind of gotten the point across. There are some books that are going to be way too competitive that won't see the light of day if you publish them, because there's already like a zillion other books, a zillion other versions of the books. And on the other side, you might find something that's too niche, but somewhere in the middle, you'll find something that people do like. And you kind of have to do that research yourself. Tools like Publisher Rocket can help you to find, like if you search for the titles of books inside of Publisher Rocket and you find some that are have a certain amount of search volume, but not a whole lot of competition, that can help you out. But here's the approach that I take. I know I've taken a while to get around to this point, but here's the approach. I like, because I'm a fiction author, I like to find books that tie in at least a little bit to my fiction books. I've written some Arthurian books. The main one you can find is Path of the Dragon by Jason Hamilton, and it's actually itself a loose adaptation of a public domain book called Fairy Queen. But because of that, my first foray into public domain books was looking up as many Arthurian texts as I could find and publishing public domain versions of those texts. Now, I did pick some books that were over competitive. For instance, you may have heard of Le Morte d'Arthur, which is probably the most famous ancient book on Arthurian legends. And that one hasn't sold very well because, well, it's the most popular. There's lots of other versions of it. But I did it anyway because I wanted to be a completionist and because it doesn't take me very long. The second thing is that I did have a few books that were maybe a little too obscure. They were like old scholarly works from the 19th century about Arthurian legends. And I thought, like, it's probably not going to get a lot of sales, but, you know, I'm a completionist. I just kept putting those out too. Again, doesn't take me very long to do, so I just did it anyway. Those haven't sold very much either. But in the sweet spot, I've had books like this one, Yigadoden, I don't know how it's pronounced. Anybody who's Wales or Welsh in the comments could do. I think the double D here is pronounced like a TH. So Godolphin. I'm probably still butchering it. But books like this one have done much better. Let me actually show you exactly how well it's done. So I'm not going to show you all of my public domain works, but I will show you my Arthurian ones. I have a couple of other niches that I've gone into that make me a couple $1,000 or have made me a couple $1,000. This one you can tell has made me getting close to $4,000 here. This is just my Arthurian books that I've published. And you can see I've got these two at the top, Black Book of Carmarthen and Ygodothin as my top two. Ygodothin is maybe $600 so far. The other one is maybe 800. And as you go down, you get to some of the more obscure ones that like haven't really made much money. Or they're newer in some cases. Like this one here, where are we? There's a Fairy Queen. Okay, nope, that's not it. Okay, that's actually risen pretty quickly. The Fairy Queen Book 1 Modern Translation. This is a recent one that I did like 2 months ago. And it's already sold 5 copies and made me $20. So that might not sound like a lot, but the fact that it's been able to do that in just 2 months, and some of these haven't made $20 at all in their entire lifetime, like that's pretty good. It's going to rise. This one I predict within a year will be making a lot more than $20 a month. And all of this adds up, right, over time. And I'm going to have more, like this is just Fairy Queen Book 1 Modern Translation. I mean, I've got 5 more to publish. And so we'll see how that goes. But you can see this is each month. It has pretty much, goes up and down, but it's remained more or less steady for years now. And I haven't published any new ones except recently in a long, long time. The other thing you might notice, at least if you're familiar with Book Report, which is the service I'm using here, is that this is actually all paperback sales. And so I'll give you a little hack here. It's probably not necessary anymore with the rise of AI, but I found out, if we go back to Amazon's policies on publishing public domain content, remember that it has to be differentiated either as a new translation with new annotations or with new original illustrations. Because of this requirement, I found it difficult to put all of the effort into to make these extra things. And so I wasn't publishing ebooks, but I found out that these requirements do not apply to paperbacks. So I just started publishing paperbacks. And now paperbacks don't sell as well as ebooks. But they do sell something. And particularly when there isn't a large number of other options like that Ygodothin book, people still buy them anyway. Especially if it's a good cover and you've done your job, it's well formatted and all of that. So that's why I published a whole bunch of paperbacks. These are all paperbacks. Now you'll notice right over here, there's this red, that is ebooks. And this little red bit here is coming from the newer ones that I just started publishing. The newer books like that Fairy Queen, Modern Translation, and others. Now, those have only made me $20-30 so far, which is what you see here. But I did publish ebooks of those. And from here on in the future, I will be publishing ebooks for everything. In fact, I'll probably be going through all of these, especially the ones that make me the most money, like the Black Book of Carmarthen and Ygodothin, to actually go through and provide ebook copies of those with my AI enhancements involved. Because there's definitely clearly monetary opportunity there for me, with this one making me $800 over its lifetime, this one $600, and that's a lot of money considering it took me probably like an hour or two to put this book together and publish it. And that's because I wasn't differentiating it with annotations or translations or anything like that. I was just putting together the paperback version and publishing it. So that's pretty good. Now, obviously, not all of them have done that, but you put out enough of them, and there's that sweet spot where you'll get a handful that are making you a decent amount of money. Hope that makes sense. Any questions so far about anything I've covered, be sure to let me know in the chat. Let's see. So here's one that says, you make a good point about needing a professional appearing cover, but is there any added value in adding public domain or AI illustrations inside such a book? You can add public domain illustrations, but Amazon will not count that. So with Amazon's publishing requirements here, it says it has to be 10 or more original illustrations relevant to the book. And this is actually a good point that I should bring up. They need to be original, which means they cannot have appeared anywhere else on the internet first. And Amazon looks for them. I know because I got a warning from one time. Amazon will scan and try to look for images, which means if you're doing AI versions, AI art as your illustrations, you need to have a premium account with whatever AI tool you're using to make sure that the images that you generate remain private. So only you can have them. A lot of companies, like, let's just use Midjourney as the examples, kind of the number one art generator out there. Midjourney, at all of the lower tiers, makes all of the images public. So any image that you generate, anybody can see it. There's a large database of images. Now, most of them get buried and you can't see them, but they are technically live and people can find them. And Amazon can find them. So you are going to have to invest in a more expensive plan with Midjourney or with whatever other AI art thing you're using. And make sure you have the privacy turned on. That way Amazon will not be able to see it. It'll be exclusive to your account. And then when you post those images into the public domain content and you try to publish that on Amazon, it will be original, basically. So yeah, that's a good point to keep in mind. You want to make sure that they are original, because Amazon will scan the internet and look and see if it existed before you publish it, basically. And I do believe that you can, if you do it right, you can absolutely add value with AI art in there. Because there's, you can even take a chapter of the public domain content and have ChatGPT give you a prompt for your AI thing, so that you can actually have like story relevant artwork for each chapter and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. And yeah. So, okay, let's continue on. Next section that we're going to talk about is, okay, we talked about finding your niche. All right. Where do you get public domain content? That's a good question. And there's actually several places. The most common place that you will find the content is in Gutenberg.org. So Gutenberg.org, Gutenberg. This is probably the largest repository of public domain books in existence. You can search for things, you can browse. Usually if I'm doing my approach, which is to find a niche and then like list all of the books in that niche, like all of the Arthurian books, for example, in my case, and I'll just make a list and I'll go one by one through everything on that list and see where I can find a version of it online. Occasionally Gutenberg doesn't have it because it's a little bit more obscure, but usually if you Google it, you can find it. Let's see, a good example of this would be some of the pulp fiction. There's a lot of pulp fiction that existed in the early 20th century. And like, we're talking hundreds and thousands of stories written during that time, in various genres. And Some of that is available in Project Gutenberg, but most of it actually isn't. And in fact, I'd say probably 80% of it isn't even available in an easy way to copy and paste online. I've had to do some research, and I was able to find PDFs of the original pulp magazine that the story comes from. So you can find the PDF, you can read it in the PDF format, but then you have to transcribe it into something that's editable to properly format it. And that can be a hassle. AI, of course, makes it way easier because it does a really good job at transcription. But that's just another step you'll have to go through if you want to publish that type of content. But usually you can find any public domain piece of content just by Googling it. And I would Google it by like putting in the title and then saying free or like online text or full text or PDF, or add something like that. Let's someone give me an example. Something that's like maybe not too common. Let's try Carmilla. Full text. Okay, so this one is on Project Gutenberg. This is like one of the earliest vampire stories ever. So yeah, so this one's common enough that you'll find it here on Project Gutenberg, and then they'll have a whole bunch of different versions of the story. The one that I go to typically, I believe it's this one, plain text. Yeah. Well, no, that might not be what I want. Read online web. So here we go. We're going to walk through this process of what we're going to do here. So the next step after you've found the story that you want to write is to copy and paste it into a formatting program. Now, everybody, if you watch the channel or you're in my membership, you know that I am partial to Atticus. There really isn't another formatting tool out there that makes it as easy as Atticus. The only one that comes close is Vellum, but that is Mac only. So if you have a Windows or a Linux machine, you're out of luck. But with Atticus, it's cloud-based, so you can access it from whatever machine you have, whether that's Windows or Chromebook or whatever. So if we were to actually, let's not use Carmilla because I have one ready here. So let's see, Fairy Queen, full text. And I think this is just the first book. Yeah, so Gutenberg has the first book of the Fairy Queen, but there's 6 of them. So let's see, let's look at the next one down. Ew, I don't like that. That's gonna have be a mess of copying and pasting here. Sometimes you need to try to find a clean version, otherwise you're gonna give yourself a lot more work. That's okay, this is good, but this is just the first book too. Fairy Queen is one of those things that I believe to be criminally underrated. Okay, here we go. So book 2. We got the introduction here, I think. Yep. So we're gonna go in, I think this is the problem. So this is, we're in book 2. Yep. I'm not gonna go into all of this. But yeah, so this will copy and paste into there. You might have to touch it up a little bit, because there are going to be some things that are like a little weird. But I'm just copying and pasting the, let's also copy this title into, into here. The second book of the Fairy Queen, containing the legend of Sir Guyan, or of temperance. You can tell this is old time speak because just the words it uses are very, spelled weirdly and all of that. I'll just do this one little section because we don't have time to go much further. But what I do for this particular version is I create a summary. Actually, I can pull this up because I have it already written on my website. Book 2. There we go. So I can just copy and paste this from my website, which is just commentary. So this is just commentary on the proem. And then I put the original text here of the proem, a couple of stanzas here, right? And then I go, what I'm doing now to offer additional value for the Fairy Queen is to provide a modern prose edition. So this is one way in which you can use AI to enhance your topic here. So we're going to go into Novel Crafter, and we're just going to copy this, put it into Novel Crafter, and okay, that's better. And this is obviously, it's a poem, right? And it does have a rhyming stanza. So the prompt that I've created to do this is geared specifically for these texts. So that's something to keep in mind. Your prompt may have to be sometimes project specific, and you'll need to tweak it for each project. But what I've created here, I'll show you the prompt is called Make It Modern. The model that I'm using is Claude 3.5 Sonnet. And the instructions go like this. You are tasked with translating an ancient text into a more modern prose edition that a middle schooler could understand. It should be at an 8th grade reading level. This task aims to make the text more accessible to contemporary readers while preserving its core meaning and significance. Follow these instructions carefully. And I'll say, first, here's the ancient text you will be working with. And then it automatically pulls in the text that I will be highlighting later. And then I'll say, please follow these guidelines when translating the text. Translate the given text into modern English using contemporary vocabulary and phrasing. Aim for an 8th grade reading level. Use simple sentence structures and avoid complex jargon. Preserve the original meaning and intent of the text as much as possible. Do not add or remove significant information. If there are archaic or obscure terms, replace them with modern equivalents. Break down long, complex sentences into shorter, more digestible ones when appropriate. Maintain the overall tone and style of the original text as much as possible. And here's one that I added specifically for this project. If the original text was in verse, which this one is, make the modern translation into paragraphs of prose. But if the verses are numbered, keep the verse numbers or Roman numerals. Return only the translated text as instructed with no preamble. Because I found that sometimes it was giving me like, yes, I will be happy to translate that for you, kind of an introduction. So I asked it to not do that, and it stopped doing that. Remember, the goal is to make the text understandable to a middle school student while retaining the essence and significance of the original ancient text. So this is my prompt. I'm trying to make it like a really basic English that anybody can understand. You can take this in a lot of different ways. Say you wanted to create like a storybook version that's even more simplified for like a 3 or 4 year old level, right? I have a 3-year-old in my house. And I actually have plans to make my own books into a storybook version that I could read to her at her level. And I think that could be really cool, not just with public domain books, but with any books, as long as you have the rights to work on them. If you have your own books, for instance, you can create different versions of that book for different reading levels. You could create like a picture book for like a 1 to 2 year old, a storybook for a 3 to 5 year old, etc. You know, you can just take prompts like this to really dumb it down to that level. I think there's lots of potential there, but this one I'm just trying to get it down to about an 8th grade reading level, which even though that's like middle schooler, that is like the average of what, in fact, I think the average in the United States is less than that. Funny enough, but we're just trying to get it down to a pretty simple text. So let's actually do this. So first let's read a little bit of this so you can get a sense for the difference. So we've got containing the legend of Sir Guyon or of temperance, right? Well, I wrote most mighty Sourain, not sure who, how to say that, that all this famous antique history of some, the abundance of idle brain, will judged be and painted forgery rather than matter of just memory. Sith none that breatheth living air doth know where is that happy land of fairy. Okay. This is why the Fairy Queen is underrated, is because it's very hard to read. You have to really spend some time looking at it and trying to understand what each phrase means. So let's go ahead, and because this is short enough, I can highlight the whole thing. Usually I don't highlight more than a couple hundred words at a time, just in case the AI wants, tries to shorten it. If you give it too much, the AI will shorten things. And then I'm going to hit that prompt that I just showed off to you, say make it modern. And the second book, The Fairy Queen, containing the legends of Sir Guyon or of temperance, and I got the spellings correct. I know very well, most mighty ruler, that many people will think this famous old story is just made up by someone with too much free time. They'll say it is a painted lie rather than a true memory. This is because no living person knows where the happy land of fairy is. I talk about it a lot, but never show where it is. I only mention old stories that nobody can prove. Is that what you got from the original version? Because this is way more understandable. And I'll just hit apply to make sure Novel Crafter has it all set. And then I can just take this. Oop, hang on. Take this copy and paste into the modern version. And boom, we're done with that chapter. And then I just repeat that for all the other chapters of the book. There's 12 in this case. And then I'm ready to go. So that's the process. I'm not going to go into a full tutorial about how to format an Atticus, but suffice it to say, Atticus does a good job. It's pretty simple, especially once you have your parameters all set up. You don't really have to change them again. You can just, keep reusing it. I'll show you what the print version looks like. It looks like this. So it'll show you, it'll be numbered. We have like page numbers here, page 6. It'll have other things involved there. It gets the margins correct. So one side of the margin is going to be bigger than the other, and that will flip-flop. So you notice this margin is bigger than this margin. And then it's the opposite on this side. This side is shorter than this side. That's because it's called a gutter margin. Because the margin on the inside closest to the spine of your book is supposed to be larger than the one on the outside. And so Atticus can do things like that, which are tricky. If you're using Word or Scrivener to get those things right, it's very tricky. But Atticus does it automatically. So suffice it to say, it does a good job of this sort of thing. Okay. Aries Mars Express says, which AI does Novel Crafter use? Anyone you want. It's up to you. You choose. In this case, with this particular prompt, I had set it to use Claude 3.5 Sonnet, as you can see here. But I could easily change this to be GPT-4o or any of the others. You experiment, figure out which ones you like the best, and use those. I find that different models work better for different purposes. Some models work better for editing. Some work better for original prose, etc. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the next step. So this step, I've gone ahead, I've created my new improved version. Let's just assume that I've already gone through and added all of the text and it's all ready to go. Then the next step is to just publish it on Amazon. So let's walk through what that looks like. So I'll show you with one of my other books. So let's look at the first book of the Fairy Queen here. So same project, but the first volume. When you go to publish an ebook on Amazon, it'll look something like this, but with blank spaces here. This is all filled out already. So I just went through and started filling this out. I did a whole masterclass a while ago about uploading a book to KDP, so I would reference that if you want me to go into more detail about this. But we have book 1, modern translation, and then I put this note here in brackets saying translated, because that's something that Amazon asks you to do. Added it to the series of Fairy Queen Modern Translations. The author is Edmund Spencer, not me. I did put myself here as an editor, just under contributions. And I added the book description here. And then here's the part that's different for public domain works. Under publishing rights, we have either I own the copyright and hold the necessary publishing rights, or this is a public domain work. So in this case, because I have the public domain work in there and I was doing basically a direct translation, I would just put, yes, this is a public domain work. However, I actually don't think that if you are writing a completely new version of it, like a modern translation, where it's essentially rewriting the text entirely, I actually think you can copyright that. At least you could if you were doing it without AI. It almost seems like cheating to use AI for the whole process. But if you are rewriting it, so it's not a translation per se, but it's like a rewriting of the text from like an older version of English text to a newer version of English text. If I were to do that myself without the aid of AI, 100% I would be able to publish that under my own name as my own title that's not public domain. To be safe with these Fairy Queen books, I am still calling it a public domain work, and part of that is because I have the original text included in the book. But let's say you just created a modern prose edition of a public domain book and you didn't have the original edition in there at all. I think you could probably publish that as you owning the copyright. And I think you could, I think that would work. So keep in mind that for this book, I am playing it safe, but I actually don't think for a complete rewriting of the book, I don't think you need to actually put this as a public domain work. Now, if you've got the whole public domain work included and you've added annotations and stuff like that, then you would want to put this as a public domain work. So clarification. So Aries Mars Express says you have to make sure you are totally rewriting it and not using the same characters. That's not true. You can use the same characters. In fact, I have written a fiction fantasy book that is loosely based on the Fairy Queen and has the same characters, but is a completely different book and a slightly different story. And it's all in my words. And that is mine. You can use public domain characters all you want. That's why like Marvel can use Loki and Thor, because those are public domain characters. Now I can't use Marvel's version of Loki and Thor because their version of Loki and Thor is copyrighted and trademarked, but I can go back to the original source of the prose edda and everything where we get our Norse mythology from, and I can draw from those public domain sources all I want. Doesn't have to be as long as it's not copying exactly what Marvel did, I'm fine to use those characters. Laura Dupre says, I would love some advice on how to format a TXT file of several hundred pages. The extra characters and wonky paragraphs just make it an ineffective use of my time. Yeah, that's tough. It's going to depend on each thing. Sometimes putting it into a Word doc and doing some fancy things in Word are a good way to do it. Like some fancy, I'm not just talking about regular find and replace, but sometimes you can get into some fancy find and replace options. It takes a little bit of extra work. That's beyond the scope of this live stream. Yeah, sometimes there are formatting issues when you're copying and pasting these public domain things into a program like Atticus or Word. And so sometimes you have to do some fancy like find and replace type stuff to get rid of footnotes or other things like that. Word is the only program I know that really has like massive capability when it comes to find and replace, but you have to like learn a whole bunch of special stuff to do it. And again, that's way beyond the scope of this video. So anyway, Coolant516 says, is there a way to research what might be a profitable niche? I kind of covered this at the beginning. My recommendation would be to go to Publisher Rocket, get a list of public domain works, and especially try to get a list of public domain works in a specific niche. And then go through them and just copy and paste the titles into Publisher Rocket and see what the data says. Some of them are going to be way too saturated. Some of them are going to be like way too niche, and you'll never find people buying it at all. Some will be right in the middle, and that's kind of what you want to do. As I mentioned earlier, I like the idea of tying it into my books. So if I have books that I've already written, finding public domain books that are related in that category and then publishing as many of those as possible, not only will that kind of increase your credibility and give you other things that you can sell to your audience, but it could also make a good add-on. Say if you're selling books directly on your website, you could say, hey, buy my book. And also, like if the Fairy Queen, for example, because I've written an adaptation of the Fairy Queen, buy this book, and you can also get like my modern prose edition of the Fairy Queen for an extra $10 or whatever you want to put on there, because there's 6 volumes, so $10 would be a steal for all 6. Anyway, so Aries Mars Express commenting on the rewriting thing, he says, I don't think using AI automatically precludes you from copywriting the work. It depends on how much you wrote it and how much the AI did. If you are controlling every line and it is only wording it, I disagree with this. In Amazon's eyes, they just care is like, is it different? It's not a translation per se, because it is a complete rewriting of text in a modern prose format. And for all they know, I could have written it. Now, I'm going to disclose that I used AI because they want you to, but it's a new version of the book is all I'm saying. It's not a translation. It is a new version of the book in a different form of speech. That is not the same as, like, if it was a translation and I was taking it from, say, Spanish to English, then that would be more of a direct translation. And the English version would not be considered a new thing. It would be considered a translation. But to go from like an old version of speech to a new version of speech that's more modern, that's something totally different. And it's a totally different word. And it doesn't matter to Amazon if AI did it or you did it. It just matters to them, is it going to get them into legal trouble? And it won't, because it's a totally new form of text. Oh, I see what you say. So he said, not for your translation, but in general for original works. Yes. So AI text without any kind of human input is not copyrightable. But anything you do to the text, including the layout and the formatting and any edits that you put in there or anything at all, can be copyrighted. And you don't even have to disclose to the US Copyright Office what you did and what the AI did. You can just say, this contains some AI passages that are not copyrightable, but my inclusion, the method that I use to include those passages in my work is copyrightable, and so my version of this text is still copyrightable, and the U.S. Copyright Office is okay with that. And that's just in the U.S. There are a number of countries already that do allow you to copyright AI text. The UK is one of them, Japan's one of them, New Zealand's one of them, China's one of them. So it's only a matter of time before the U.S. gets there, in my opinion, because, like, for instance, and this is a tangent, but do you know what it takes to own copyright for a photographic image? You push a button. If you push the button, you own the copyright of that image, which means if you ask somebody to take a picture of you while you're on vacation, like you get with your significant other and somebody takes a picture of you, they actually own the copyright to that picture, not you. Doesn't matter that it's your camera and everything. So fun fact, be careful. Now in most cases it's not going to matter, but yeah, just be careful. And the reason for that is because when you take the picture, you're making, like if you're a photographer, you're making conscious decisions on framing and all of these things. And so when you take the picture, that is a significant human input to qualify for copyright. And I think what we're going to find with AI is that prompting serves a similar purpose. If you prompt the AI, the process of creating that prompt and using that prompt in your own way, in my opinion, should be considered just as much significant human input to validate copyright as clicking a button on a camera. But that's just me. And that's where I think it's going to go eventually once these things get worked out in courts and whatnot. Anyway, so that's everything we had to worry about here about the public domain. I know we spent a lot of time on that. You go through the rest of the Amazon process here. You grab your categories and your keywords. I'm not going to get into that today. Then you go into the content section of your Kindle Direct Publishing account, and you upload the edited, formatted version that you got from Atticus, assuming you're using Atticus. Upload that manuscript here, and then you upload your cover. Now, I do need to talk about the cover here. So give me a second to pull up the covers that I'm using here. Now, this could be potentially the most difficult part for a lot of you. Especially if you lack a little bit in design skills. So I'll give you a recommendation, but I do strongly recommend investing in some minor Photoshop skills. I recommend this to all authors, not just if you want to publish public domain. It's useful to have at least a little bit of skill in Photoshop. And so I'll show you what I do. Come on. If it'll, whoop, my computer will work here. This is my cover for the Fairy Queen Book 1 modern translation that I've just been showing off to you. These images that you see here in this space is it's AI generated. I spent a lot of time on these AI generated things. Like his helmet didn't used to look like this, and I enhanced the dragon a little bit, and the dragon had like an extra arm at one point where I took out. So you may need to edit these. You might need to upscale them. That's assuming you're using AI art in the cover, which you can. But this whole thing that you see here with the gold letters here, the green background image that you see here in the back, the spine here, and everything you see here, apart from these two AI images, is all part of a template that I created. And I'm actually pretty proud of this template. I think it looks really good. Really professional, and probably the best book cover best book cover template that I've ever personally created. I'm not an artist by any chance, but I did make this, and I'm pretty proud of it. What I recommend for public domain publishing is to come up with a certain template for it, because it'll save you a ton of time. I would probably suggest one template per niche. So if I were to do a different niche, and I actually have, I have a couple of niches that I'm in with public domain, some of which I haven't mentioned to you. I will sometimes create a totally different template for those niches. Sometimes I'll take this one and I'll modify it. Like instead of green, we'll go with like a purple. I haven't published any of these yet, but I'm planning on getting into some gothic niches like Dracula, Frankenstein kind of stuff. And for that one, I'm going to change this so the text looks a little different. And it's more of a purple vibe, and there's probably like, instead of this, you can kind of see the there's like a landscape, a green landscape background here in the green. Instead of that, it'll probably be like a Gothic arch or something like that. So just a few tweaks to the template, but the same overall format with this like ripped paper look, and the AI generated image here in the front and center, that would still remain the same. So it would still look more or less parallel to this. It just might have a different color and stuff for a different niche. But in some niches, like if I did nonfiction, for example, I wanted to do like Think and Grow Rich, which is a famous book by Napoleon Hill, who that is now in the public domain. I probably wouldn't use this template. I would come up with a different like nonfiction public domain template that I would use and use that instead. You can absolutely hire a designer, a professional designer, to build you a book cover. And if you talk to them and negotiate with them, you can get them to do it as a template, so you could easily swap a few things out. So for instance, all I have to do with this particular cover is I just need to change the text. So for instance, keeping it really simple, for the second book of the Fairy Queen, the second modern translation that I'm doing, all I would need to do is make this 1 a 2. There we go. And now it's book 2 modern translation. And then I would swap out these AI images for something more appropriate to that particular book. Since it's the same author, I would leave that here. So, but if I was doing a different book with a different author, obviously I'd have to change the title and the author here. If it's part of the same niche, I can keep this little thing about the Arthurian Classics collection that I put here, change the text on the spine, and the description on the back. So there's still a lot of things I have to change with each one, but having a template like here saves you so much time in like, rather than having to make or purchase a new cover for every single one that you do. The only other thing, and this is why I recommend authors have a certain amount of Photoshop skills, is that you may, you probably will, for every single book, need to adjust the spine, assuming you're creating paperbacks in addition to ebooks. You'll need to adjust the spine width. And this is, again, beyond the scope of this live stream. But having some Photoshop skills so you can, you know, if your book is shorter, the spine width would need to be shorter. If it's longer, it needs to be, you know, fatter. So that's just something you can keep in mind. Now, a good designer will probably have a, you can talk to a designer about resizing it. So just taking your template and resizing it at the correct size. And that'll usually be a lot cheaper than, you know, creating a whole new cover for you. So you can usually find designers that'll do that for you. It'll be like $30-40 as opposed to, you know, however much it would be to create a whole new cover. Sometimes cheaper. I would expect it in the $30 range for a service like that to resize everything to correct specifications. And then that's your cover. Okay. So that's going to be a hurdle for some of you, but if you can do it right, you give yourself a much better chance of making money with public domain. So you upload the cover here. You get to the AI generated content thing here, and this is where you need to specify if you used AI in the generation of the content, which if you're following my instructions from this video, you probably did. And so you do need to specify everything here. Do not worry, Amazon will not ban you for using AI generated content, even with public domain works. That's not why they have this thing here. They are more interested in knowing what you're doing and how you're doing it. And they're not looking to ban you because AI, they know that AI can provide legitimate value. It's not, you're not cheating with AI. You're just saving time and able to do things that you would not have been able to do otherwise, like a modern prose translation, for example. I think the modern prose translations provide an immense amount of value for people who, you know, have trouble understanding the original text. So what if it was with AI? Amazon doesn't care. But they do care to understand like what tools are being used. They're probably looking to acquire companies out there and says all of that. Yeah, someone just pointed out this says book 2 here and this says book 1. Yeah, I would need to change all that if I were actually creating a cover for this book. So yeah, make sure your AI, everything is launched. Make sure that your launch previewer checks out, that there are no errors there. That's when you know if your book cover is sized correctly or not. Then you just go to your Kindle ebook pricing. Make sure you're in all territories, assuming you have the rights to do so. If your book is public domain in one country and not another, you might want to exclude those countries, but in the most cases you don't. And then you select the royalties. Now, if this is a public domain book, Amazon forces you to select 35% royalties. So this is a reason why you, like, if you have a completely rewritten book, like a modern prose edition or a storybook edition or whatever, and it's completely rewritten, this is one of the reasons why you might not want to select public domain. Because if it's not public domain, you can select the 70% royalties. However, if it is a public domain book, you must, it will force you to do the 35% royalties, which is annoying, but it's fine. You can make up for it by producing a ton of these, and all of them collectively will make a little bit of money, so that you'll have enough there. So you select the price. I usually prefer to price high. And then you publish right here. Publish your Kindle ebook. And then I follow the same steps for the paperback. Just the only thing that's different about the paperback is the cover is a little different because it's got to wrap around the whole paperback, and there's a few other minor things that are different about the paperback, but it's more or less the same process. And that's about it with public domain. So feel free to ask a few questions. We've gone on for a while here, a little like an hour and 20 minutes, but I have time for a couple of questions if you've got them. So feel free to put those in the chat right now, and I'll answer them. But this is pretty fun. The only things that I see really causing a major barrier of entry to anybody that wants to do this is maybe some minor design skills in Photoshop, or if you don't have design skills but you have money and you want to just pay somebody to make good covers, then doing that. What I don't recommend you do is don't make bad covers. A lot of people will just like throw up an AI generated image with some like white Times New Roman font text over the thing, and it just looks so unprofessional and not great. That's not what you want if you want to have any success with public domain books. You want it to look professional. You want it to look like something you could find in a bookstore. Because most public domain books out there do not have that level of quality of the book, especially the ones that you want to target, the ones that are that people are interested in, but there aren't a lot of good versions of it out there. Those are the ones you definitely want to have good covers for. So if you have the money, get someone to give you a good cover. Or pay someone to give you a template, which you can then tinker with and swap out some elements of it with each thing. Really, no questions in the chat? How many people we got watching right now? There's like 70 of you. Come on, give me some love. Just kidding. If you have no questions, that means I did a good job. I'll mention again. I mentioned this at the beginning, but I have been out of commission for a little while. Part of that was because I went on vacation first, and then in poor timing, I got a medical issue right as I was getting home from the vacation. Thankfully, it didn't happen while I was on vacation. That would have been a nightmare. But I was in the hospital for a couple of days and in bed rest for a couple of weeks. And only a week ago did I start actually going back to work. So it's been a wild ride, and that's why there's been a gap in new YouTube videos lately. But last week I did film 3 more. And as soon as those are done with the editors, those will be going out like this live stream today. So that's where we're at. All right. Okay, we got one question here. So 9J Shan says, have you tried using your original story to generate sequels with mostly AI? First of all, when you're writing an original story, I find AI needs a lot of guidance. So you're not going to be able to do anything with mostly AI without giving it a lot of hand-holding along the way. This is particularly true for certain genres that are less formulaic. So there are some genres like romance. A lot of romance is very formulaic, and people don't mind that. Like the readers love the same thing over and over, particularly in romance, just with slightly different characters and situations. I feel like it would be easier to do that with only AI as long as your prompting and your methods were really on point. But in my case, with like a fantasy or science fiction, or if you're doing a mystery or something like that, where the plot gets more complicated, there's more involved. That's very, very difficult to do with just AI, without a lot of human input to make sure that it's writing the right thing. So you have like a detailed summary of your whole thing, of your book and your story and your plot, as well as a fair amount of validating and editing to make sure it's the quality is good once it's generated stuff. So just giving it my book and say, hey, generate a sequel from this, that's not really something that happens. And it wouldn't be very good either, because a sequel needs to be structured. It needs to follow good storytelling guidelines, and those are things that you have to come up with. You can use AI to help you along, to give you ideas, but in general, you have to do that. Follow-up question from 9J Shan. Have you tried to take, for example, a story you love, say Star Wars, and make your own sci-fi content? I would be very careful with that line of thinking. It is entirely possible to take established copyrighted work and sort of rewrite it to be different characters, maybe slightly different situations, and then publish it as your own. That's illegal to do that. That is plagiarism. Even if the text itself is completely different, if you are doing that with copyrighted material. So basically, like what you're saying, if I took Star Wars and did exactly what I did here with the public domain work, created a different prose version, maybe changed the names of the characters, and then published that as my own, because that's like, it's illegal if I do it with public domain, but it is not legal if I'm doing it with content. Even if I just change the names, that's not okay. Now, there's a caveat to this. That's if you are taking the text and just running it through AI and asking it to like reword it, right? If I was inspired by Star Wars and I created my own story that was similar to Star Wars, but not directly using the text, then that's different. In fact, I have a series I plan on writing that's heavily inspired by Star Trek. I have a ship that's going to be a lot like the Enterprise D and stuff like that, but that's inspired by, not like, I'm not going to take an episode of Star Trek and rewrite it in my own style with AI and then just change all the names around. Like, that would be plagiarism. That would be illegal. And if I was caught, I could get into a lot of trouble. But if I'm just taking inspiration from it and coming up with my own plots and stuff like that, then that's different. Hope that makes sense. Foxite says, "Have you tips how you should think when you find a domain book? What will you think when you choose a domain?" I'm not entirely certain what you're talking about. If you're using a program like Publisher Rocket, you can use data to figure out which ones might have potential to make money or not. Inkier says, if you're self-publishing outside of Amazon's print on demand, how do you go about getting physical copies for sale on your own site or in person? Depends on your goals. So if you want to if you want to do something like a limited print run where you print in mass, like a couple thousand copies of your books, and then ship them out directly rather than doing print on demand, that takes some work. I know there are companies out there that will do that, but then you usually have to do the fulfillment of it, meaning it's got to be in your garage, in your living room, wherever you store those pallets of books, or whatever, and then you have to ship them out. There are ways to like get Amazon to help you with that, but it's generally better to just go with Amazon's own print on demand services. It's way easier. There are also services like the big one that I like is called Book Vault. And it does print on demand. It's still print on demand, but it will integrate with Shopify or WooCommerce or whatever plugins you're deciding to use to sell directly on your website. Shopify is the big one that most people are using. It'll integrate with Shopify so that people can buy the book on your website, and then Book Vault will ship it out. They'll print it and ship it out to the customer. So that's what I would do personally. If I were selling direct, I would integrate my Shopify site with Book Vault and use them. Okay. Okay, so is it so one question here from WTVHD Entertainment Pro says, okay, so is it advisable to make a digest read lasting 50 pages of some old epic instead of 2,000 pages? Maybe. There are actually a lot of books on Amazon, and they're legal, but they're kind of like borderline scammy, and nobody really likes them. Of summaries of other people's books. So for instance, and this, you could even do this with copyrighted content. There are people out there that will take like, what's a famous book read, like Atomic Habits. Okay. The book Atomic Habits, huge bestseller nonfiction book. You can go and look, and you'll find a whole bunch of people that have written books that are like summary of Atomic Habits. And it's like the 10-minute version of the book. So for the people that don't want to read the whole book. In that case, those are legal. You can do those. You can publish summaries of even copyrighted books. But nah, it's borderline scammy, and nobody likes them. And they exist, and I think they make most of their money by accidentally tricking people into thinking that it's the original book or something like that. And they price it super low, and yeah. So I don't know about a 50-page digest. I don't see the value that you would get out of that. I think perhaps like a storybook version meant for a younger audience could work. But yeah, that just depends. That depends. I just personally would not try to go for the like summary of such and such book. For older books, so if you have like your 2,000 page epic, a study guide would be fine. Those aren't too scammy. They get close to that, to the type of thing that the scammy books are trying to do, but they're not really like a good study guide is still valuable. All right, another question here. If using public domain copies that are in image format like JPEG or PNG, etc., do you use an OCR to pull the text? Good question. I do sometimes get PDFs of public domain books, and they're not available anywhere on the internet in like a text format, so I have to use the images in the PDF. I don't use OCR anymore because OCR makes a lot of mistakes. AI does better than OCR. And so I will, I've done this. I've taken a PDF and then used a software to basically extract all the images of every page. So I have just a list of images in the PDF, and then I'll go through one by one. It sounds tedious, but it's not too bad. Go through one by one through each of the images, upload it to Claude or ChatGPT, and ask it to transcribe it. It'll do a far better job than any OCR software out there. And I would love, I'm not aware of any, but I would love it if I could find a good tool out there that's basically an OCR software, but using AI instead of OCR. I'm sure there's probably a software out there that exists. If not, somebody out there go make one, because I'll pay for that. Ian Keir says, thank you for the info. Not heard of Book Vault. No problem. M Prado says, you can create a summary of most books with AI for free. Yeah, exactly. So you don't, like, if you're one of those people that's publishing like the summarized version of such and such a book, you've lost the novelty of that product because anybody can do that now just using AI. Okay, here's another question. Do I have any resources or insights for identifying trends in book covers regarding art and layout that have shown to sell better? I figure there's probably a psychology around it in each genre. Yeah, I'm sure artists could tell you a lot better than I can. I am not an artist. I have I'd say I have a mild amount of artistic of an artistic eye. I can usually recognize when something is good. So like an artist could probably tell you exactly like what are the trends, what are good design principles that appeal to people and others that don't appeal to people. I could not tell you those things. What I can tell you is go just browse your local bookstore in the genre that you like or that is related to your public domain books that you're doing. So like for my Arthurian stuff, the covers look very fantasy-esque or historical fiction-esque because that's like the closest genres to Arthurian fiction. And so I tailored the template to look kind of like the letters are in a cool golden font and all of that to appeal to more of a fantasy audience. And that's the best thing you can do is just go look at bestsellers. Go on Amazon and browse the bestsellers in a particular genre. Go to your bookstore and browse the bookshelves and look at all the covers in a particular genre. And then just sort of like look for trends. It's one of the best things you can learn to do is trend identify. Identify trends. Because you'll start to see what some of those trends are and then try to get something that is consistent with that trend and you'll be golden. You'll be fine. Rip Pop says, do you think adding multiple illustrations in the book can help boost the sales? Maybe. It's one way to differentiate. I haven't shown any examples of it, but it is one way to differentiate your book by having some images involved. I think it can definitely improve the value that people get out of it. I tried for a little while creating some like illustrated versions of my books, my own personal books, and I had like every chapter had a different image with it, and it was AI generated image, and it did okay. I did not see any significantly improved sales because of it. I think it's a nice to have, but honestly, even the time it took me to create all of those images, like 40 images per book, and put them into my book, didn't seem worth the effort. Now, for a public domain book, you only need 10 images, so that won't take you as much time. It would probably take you less time than creating a modern prose translation like I demonstrated today. But I think it is... I don't know. I think it's fine. I don't think it's groundbreaking, especially because anybody can do it now with AI. You're going to see lots of just AI illustrated books out there, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, because AI art can sometimes be very, very good. But it has lost the novelty a little bit compared to what it used to be. It used to be like if you said this was an illustrated book, like that would have been a big deal. Now it's just like, So, Foxlight says, should you pay for an artist or do it myself when you do a domain book? Depends on how good you are. The point is to make something that is not crap. And if you can do that yourself, fine, do it yourself. If your art is crap, then you should hire an artist. That's what it boils down to. So anyway, Rip Pop asks if this live will be deleted after. No, I will be keeping this live on YouTube. All right, I think that's probably good for the questions. I got to be going anyway and eat my lunch. Take a little break because I've been sitting down for hours now. So I appreciate all of you being here. Hope this has been informative on using AI in public domain and the whole process around public domain. everything I've learned so far. Really appreciate it, and I will see you soon. I don't know when my next video will actually go out, probably Friday. But I might have another live stream in the meantime to take us there. So, all right, I'll see you guys, and yeah.